So firstly, I'd like to start by having some discussion about the United Nations Environment Program, so that we actually know what it is and what its goals are.
Just before I dive into talking about UNEP, maybe I should actually say that Liz and I actually have a background with Rotary. I had the immense privilege of being a Rotary Peace Fellow, and I had a fellowship that put me through graduate school, and I was incredibly lucky to be able to go to the University of California, Berkeley, and do a Master's of Public Policy. And I think, Liz, you were a Rotary Scholar, right?
I went from my hometown, a small town, to University of Geneva's graduate school for international relations. So Rotary, I really have to thank for putting me on my career path at the UN.
And when I was at doing my graduate school and doing a Master's of Public Policy, my goal was to use the skills that I was learning there and go on and work, on using communication and advocacy to inform environmental policy. And after a journey, I've ended up here at UN Environment Program, Director of Communication. So, Chris, to answer your question, who are we? Who is UNEP, as we are referred to by the acronym? Well, we're the voice for the environment within the United Nations system, and we have 196 member states who are our boss, and the member states set our policy and direction. But we're the leading authority and decision-making body on the environment within the United Nations. Every 18 months or so, all of our member states come together at the, which, just like the UN General Assembly, is when the world comes together and sets the global environmental direction and policy. Now, our mandate is incredibly broad. A mandate to focus on everything from climate change to nature and biodiversity, to pollution, chemicals and waste, and a range of other issues. But despite the sort of breadth of our mandate, we're not a large organization. We're only about 1,200 staff in our secretariat, but we're also home to 15 multilateral environment agreements, as they're known. Things like the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Ozone Secretariat, and the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. So we're not a big organization by UN standards, but we've got a large mandate, and so it's a big job.
Rotary is largely a humanitarian organization, and we have, by setting up the Environmental Sustainability Rotarian Action Group, have actually tried to bring into Rotary more of the environment. So basically, your mandate is broad, and we are doing basically what is being missed by the humanitarian side of Rotary. And so what we are doing now is trying to capture some of those areas, particularly the climate change and the things that lead to climate change within within our mandate of human health and managing humanitarian issues. So we know that you've set up the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so one of the things I'd really like to look at is what those sustainability goals are, and how we are in Rotary not hitting some of those things right now, and where ESRAG and United Nations Environment Program can work together to capture some of those spaces. So, Liz, if you could help us through those Sustainable Development Goals.
Sure, I'm happy to, Chris. And you might see that I've got my little SDG pin on here. So the SDGs, in many ways, are they're our marching orders. They're our holy book, our bread and butter of what we do. The SDGs are a set of very ambitious goals that were put into place in 2015, and they have a deadline of 2030. So they're 15-year goals. You might have heard of the predecessor to the SDGs, which is something known as the Millennium Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals had as an ambition to have quite a number of situations in the world, you know, having poverty, or cutting in half the number of children who die under the age of 5, or cutting in half the number of children who don't finish primary school. So they were a set of goals that were quite ambitious, and they were reached for the most part. The Sustainable Development Goals are really taking it up another level, because they have as an ambition, there are 17 of them, first of all, but they have as an ambition universal coverage. You know, their ambition is really no hunger, universal education, clean water and sanitation for all. They are extremely ambitious. What's exciting about the SDGs, they were agreed by all the UN. They agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals. They are universal. So the Sustainable Development Goals are meant to be for every country in the world, every person in that country. And the SDGs are also indivisible. So it's widely accepted that you cannot achieve, for example, peace and security without getting universal access to water for the world's population. So these SDGs speak to each other. They're intricately interlinked. So these three concepts of their ambition, their universality, and their interlinkedness are core to that SDG agenda. And they really cover, when I was actually in the General Assembly on that day in September 2015 when the SDGs were passed, and the guy next to me turned to me and said, wow, the SDGs, they really cover everything but the kitchen sink. And then another, actually, they do cover the kitchen sink. The kitchen sink is mentioned in this SDG on hand washing, right, in this goal for health. So they are very much extremely comprehensive as a set of goals. And for us, everyone in the UN system, they are something that we're all working towards achieving. First time is bring together the traditional agendas of social and economic development, which is how the UN has tended to think of development for the last 75 years. And it brings the environmental aspect in at an equal level. So the SDGs are really equally social, economic, and environmental. Now, when you walk through them, and starting with number 1, they kind of start off as more, I would say, more social SDGs. You know, they're more social goals that we've had for a very long time. For example, eradicating poverty is number 1. Having no hunger is number 2. Universal health is goal. Number 4, SDG 4, has to do with ensuring quality education for all. Goal number 5 is for gender equality and maternal health. SDG number 6, here, that's the blue one here, the light blue one on the right, is entirely dedicated to achieving universal access to clean drinking water and sanitation. SDG number 7, you see this nice little light bulb in yellow, is for access to clean energy. And it's these goals, number 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, which really have to do with the economic. So this is where you go kind of from the social goals, these traditional, the economic realm. So number 8 has to do with encouraging local economies. Number 9 is infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure. Number 10 is reducing inequalities within countries. And number 11 is for sustainable, we call that the cities goal. And then I would say that it's almost this last set of goals, number 12, 13, 14, 15, those are really UNEP's bread and butter. These are pretty much the environmental goals. Number 12 has to do with how we produce and consume. So it's sustainable consumption and production as societies. Number 13 is for climate action. And so if you've heard of the Paris Convention and the climate change agenda, that is embedded within Goal 13 in the SDGs. They are in fact one and the same. Number 14 is to protect our oceans. Goal 15 is to protect life on land, including biodiversity. And then 16 is for peace, justice, and inclusive societies. Those are the main SDGs. Number 17 is one that really cuts across all of them. Number 17 is for partnerships. And really what that means is that we understand that rich countries need to work with poor. Countries in the global south need to work with others in the global south. The UN needs to work with the private sector, with civil society, with organizations like Rotary. So I see our collaboration with Rotary a core part of Goal 17.
Well, that's really good. What I see in what you presented and is that Rotary up till now has been largely looking at the goals 1 through 11, say, and then the environmental goals are the ones that come on the end of that, and this is where ESRAG and environmental sustainability is really coming in to address these goals from Rotary side of things. And so this is very exciting that we can actually collaborate and see up of matching Rotary's ambitions with those of the United Nations, whereas previously we were missing quite a number of them towards the end.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, you guys have been around for a really long time, and the things you've been focusing on, your 6 focus areas that you have now, you can match them directly with some of these SDGs that I just mentioned. You know, water and sanitation provision, for example, and peace and conflict prevention, maternal and child health. Those are things that are core to what we do at the UN, and I feel like Rotary has understood for a long time that they're fundamental to peaceful societies. And I think, though, a lot of what you've been doing so far and doing very well does have strong environmental connections, like tree planting. And I know that Rotary is also very active in providing hand washing facilities and clean water and sanitation access and solar power. And so I think now, I think with a more of an explicit focus on the environment, you can really put some of that work front and center.
One of the things I see that's really going to be happening with in the future, we've just gone through this COVID-19 pandemic. It's still going to be ongoing for quite some time, and often what we've had previously when we've had these crises is it creates a recession of some sort, and a lot of pressure, and the pressure leads to the environment. There's various controls that have been established to maintain the environment are eroded so that people can get re-established in some way or another. So perhaps we can talk about some examples of how Rotary can be environmental stewards. And
many of us have been reading, articles about the environment in the media in the past couple of months, and greenhouse gases are down, air quality is improving. Stories about animals on the streets of our cities and dolphins in waterways. And it's great. The global, this global lockdown has been giving people a taste of what life could be like in a cleaner environment. But the COVID-19 there's no real silver lining for the environment here. This is not to safeguard the environment. The decline in greenhouse gases is a fraction of what we need if we're going to really tackle climate change. And look, this emergency is primarily a health emergency, and secondly, there's increasing awareness that planetary health equals human health. and the numbers of people who are dying every year because of air pollution, water pollution, is absolutely astronomical. And we have an opportunity here that we can do it in a way that and I think that many countries are seeking to make that shift. We've seen some very promising moves in countries in Asia and Europe. But we also see some concerning steps in which environmental safeguards, pollution laws are being weakened, and that's something of real concern. And I think that a lot of these regulations are at subnational levels, and Rotary can have a real hand in making it clear to leaders in countries how the environment is so closely tied to the welfare of society today. It's important that Rotarians have the voice, make it clear what they want to see, and help to shape this the society that we're going to build back from as we build out of this crisis. So Liz, you want to take over from there?
I absolutely agree. I think it's important for those of us who care about the environment, which is obviously people like us here at UNEP and people that are in the ESRAG at Rotary, that we're not rejoicing for the environment right now. I think that what we're seeing as some potential gains have come at a very high cost for people and their livelihoods. And a region like part of the world like where we live in, Dan and I are based here at our headquarters in Nairobi in Kenya, which corresponds to the Rotary District 9212 for these 4 countries in our region. A city like Nairobi, 80% of the people live in informal settlements. That's our best guess. And people living in informal settlements are often in extremely vulnerable positions. They might live 8 to 10 people in a home. Social distancing is a luxury that they can't afford. People, they go out and break a curfew or lockdown in order to be able to have food to feed their families. And many people, especially in informal settlements, just don't have access to clean water, to wash their hands, to even take basic precautions, to protect themselves against COVID. So it's really a critical situation, life or death situation for many people here. But while I don't want to say there's a silver lining, I think that what we're seeing come out of this crisis, there are quite a few things that I think are actually quite inspirational. One of them is that the world can act quickly, that all over the world, that countries are learning from each other. A second thing I think is really positive to see is how important it is for communities to help each other. This role of local action, like Dan just said, I think this is exactly where Rotary, an organization like Rotary, which is local people caring about their communities, it's a very inspirational model to see. And one thing we're seeing in this region, Rotary is playing a fantastic role. I know that Rotary clubs here are raising money for personal protection equipment. They're raising money for food donations, for donating soap. They are setting up hand washing stations for population. So Rotary is really on the front line here in our part of the world, and that's a fantastic thing to see.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So Daniel, this year is the year of Biodiversity Nations Environment Program. What's the emphasis for biodiversity for you?
Well, even before this COVID-19 crisis, there were 1 million species that scientists have warned may go extinct in the short to medium term, out of the total of 8 million. So we are on the verge of a major breakdown in biodiversity, in nature. And a lot of people might be like, I think there's a lack of awareness in the public in general about why that's important and why that's a crisis. And even just looking at the COVID-19, and that is that's a zoonotic disease, which means it's a virus that's jumped from animals to people, and it's a result of the breakdown in biodiversity. It's the breakdown in nature, and we're seeing, scientists are warning that we're seeing more and more diseases, zoonotic diseases, jumping from nature to people. 70%, and so that's a direct result of this breakdown that we're seeing in nature. And our continued erosion of wild spaces, of primary forests, of our ecosystems, and that it's bringing people closer and closer to the sort of, as I call it, these reservoir hosts of diseases and viruses. And so, it's June 5 is World Environment Day. Yes, the theme is biodiversity. We're running a global campaign called Time for Nature. And we're calling on people all around the world to make their voices heard about why it is time for nature. And that can be as simple as, well, I like going for a walk in the forest or along a beach, or it can be something a little bit more existential, such, talking about how nature is absolutely critical for our food systems, for the water that we drink, the air we breathe. Nature, about how jobs in the world are in some way tied to nature, and so the world has all of the science and the technical know-how and the finance to reimagine, reposition our relationship with nature. What we lack is the political will, and so this World Environment Day, we are calling on the world for people to make their voices heard, to make it clear about why we need our society to be living in harmony with nature, not against nature. And it's totally within our grasp. It's doable. And we've chosen biodiversity, the theme of biodiversity this year, because the world was expected, countries were expected in November to come together for a global meeting in China to set the next biodiversity conservation targets for the next decade. And these are important because this is the world agreeing on what levels of conservation there needs to be. Now, because of the COVID crisis, that meeting in China has been postponed. It'll probably happen sometime in 2021, but it is absolutely critical that countries come into that meeting with ambition and with real commitment to action. Because if that doesn't happen, if we don't come out of this meeting with a strong post-2020 biodiversity framework, we are on the verge of mass extinction, and that is a major threat to our societies. So we really need people. We need Rotary. We need all sorts of civil society to step up, make their voices heard, and help be part of the solution.
Well, thank you. That's a really good place to round off our discussion this morning. One of the things I do want to mention is that United Nations Environment Program has a really excellent newsletter, and that comes out monthly. And I'd really like our audience and everybody to subscribe to the newsletter so that those developments that Daniel has been talking about and Liz will actually be seen by so many more people. And this will be a really great place to get the new information to you and distributed. This is really great.
Chris, can I just jump in for 1 sec, just to say, just sure. Give a shout out for ESRAG and the great leadership that ESRAG is playing within the Rotary system, and also a shout out for this handbook that we developed with ESRAG last year. And if you'll permit me just to share this, this is the handbook that UN Environment Program produced last year with ESRAG. Liz, myself, and many other colleagues invested a lot of hours working with Christopher, Karen, and other colleagues in ESRAG. And I understand that Rotary's now translated this into Spanish ideas of what clubs can do around the world on how to just take on a project that's focused on the environment, from planting trees to you know, safeguarding and looking after your water systems. There's a whole lot of ideas there. It's on ESRAG's website, so I do urge clubs to go and check it out and see where you can go with it.
Well, thank you very much. This is really great, and I hope that we're going to have further conversations like this.
Thanks so much, Chris. Pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye.